way, their most popular story of 2019 at Zero Hedge was this one. Electric car owners are shocked. A new study confirms that electric vehicles are considerably worse for the climate than diesel cars. Taking their assumptions as to what's good and bad for the climate, taking their assumptions about man-made climate change and so forth, when you take those assumptions and you look at the electric vehicle versus diesel cars, it was a study that came out of the University of Cologne, published by the IFO Institute in Munich, and this was a story that came out in April. I covered it at the time. I was just surprised to see that it was the most popular story at Zero Hedge. Shortly after this, as a matter of fact, you had the situation with Tesla when when Elon Musk was offended by the new Porsche electric car. He determined that he would go to the Nürburgring and go around faster or whatever, right? And so he took his car over there. He didn't have a charging station. So they took a charging station over and their own, wait for it, diesel generator. And when I talked about that, I said, there you go. That's the whole fraud of these zero-emission vehicles in a nutshell. The fact that he had this diesel generator, very noisy, very loud, very dirty, very annoying to all the neighbors there. He had that there running his quote-unquote zero-emissions electric car, powering it to go around the Nürburgring. And as they were pointing out, if you look at the life cycle of this, that it is essentially a fraud. When I've talked to Eric Peters in the past, we've laughed about the fact that electric vehicles, they put out EVs, or in many cases they call them BEVs, I guess you could call them, battery electric vehicles. And I've said many times, I said, look, as opposed to what? An ICE, an internal combustion engine? Those old ICE cars, they're, buggy whip technology and so forth. I said, well, they may be internal combustion engines, but what you're talking about is simply an external combustion engine. You don't want to see the generator that is powering your clean electric car. And now we've had Mazda at the beginning of this year come out and talk about their impending electric vehicle. And they said, we deliberately downsized the battery because if you get the battery too large, it becomes dirtier than a diesel. Essentially the same thing that was said in this other story, and they're actually working on it. And so they made a car, and they're taking a big market risk because they're making a car with a downsized battery that will only have 150 miles of range, but they say they're doing it because it's more responsible environmentally than the bigger batteries. And, as we talk about the situation in the Middle East and wars that have been there over oil and so forth, never forget that we're in Afghanistan, largely, I believe, not just because of terrorism and so forth. I think we're there because of the opioid industry. We're there for the opiates, for the poppy fields. We're also there for the lithium. And we just had Bolivia have an orchestrated coup because their only product is lithium. We will be fighting wars for corporations, whether it is for oil, or whether it is for the fruit company, as it was during the time of Smedley Butler, or whether it is for lithium and cobalt, as it will be in our future. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Well, it turns out that the bushfires in Australia truly are man-made climate change. Not in the way, however, that they're selling it to us. Yeah, it is a lot of cases. They've already caught over 24 arsonists. One of them, a Muslim teen, laughing after appearing in court for setting a grass fire. And this is something that has been pushed by Al-Qaeda and others for quite some time. Destroy the infidel, set a fire. As a matter of fact, as Jihad Watch collects the headlines going back to 2012, Daily Mail, Unleash Hell. New Al-Qaeda magazine describes in detail how to start huge forest fires across the U.S. with instructions on how to make ember bombs. Or this one from November the 15th, 2018. ISIS-linked media says California fires are retribution for Syria. Or this one from the Daily Telegraph, January the 7th, 2020. Teens charged with lighting grass fire face court. Now, one of these teens, a teen from Sydney, Australia, Fadi Zarika, one of the two teens accused of lighting a grass fire while bushfires raged New South Wales, laughed outside court today after appearing on multiple charges. Police were called to the park about 2:40 p.m. after reports of several loud explosions, saw fireworks exploding, several small grass fires that spread rapidly, and sudden winds. But they've had 24 Australians charged with arson, and many other arrests are expected. Nevertheless, this is being sold to us as some kind of a consequence of you and I having automobiles. Or, for example, eating beef. You know, everything that they don't want you to do, everything that they want to take away from you, of course, is demonized as man-made climate change. And as we had Ricky Gervais tweaking the Hollywood people at the Golden Globes Award, the LA Times, as I pointed out yesterday, was wringing its hands saying these poor people at the Hollywood Hilton, you know, they're already worried about impeachment. They're already worried about global warming and the Australian fires. And now they get ridiculed by Ricky Gervais. It's just too much, isn't it? No, actually, it is an arson epidemic. And as Climate Depot points out, an article from Jennifer Morrow Hesse, I think is the way you pronounce her name, it's been hotter, and the fires have burnt larger areas. In other words, as bad as this fire is, and it's not to minimize the destruction and the damage, it is not something that's new. It's not a new thing when you have fires in California, or we have bushfires in Australia, or we have hurricanes in Florida. These are not new things. They happen all the time. We were just watching a program put together by the old guys who used to do Top Gear. They now have Grand Tour, Clarkson and others. They went to Cambodia, and they're trying to navigate their way across this lake. And I don't know if he was serious or not, but Jeremy Clarkson was saying, yeah, here we are, we're high and dry because of climate change. You know, the lake was such a low level that they were really unable to use the boats that they had. They were getting filled up with mud and so forth. And yet, if you look at all the boats around them, okay, they show up with like a cigar boat from Miami Vice and other things that are not appropriate for the area. And the people around them have small boats that have a very low draft in the water, and they have outboard engines that are almost horizontal. They have an extremely long shaft that comes out so that it doesn't go down deep. And I said to my son, I said, well, so why does he think that people who live in that area have boats like that if this kind of shallow water isn't a natural phenomenon? It's exactly what happens all the time there. That's why they had those kinds of boats. And they were the only ones who could move. You know, they were having to hire these people to tow them around, with the exception of the boat that Clarkson had, which was a replica of a jet boat that was commissioned by the U.S. military at the time of the Vietnam War and the Southeast Asian Wars in Vietnam and Cambodia. They went to, I believe it was the North Carolina Company, and got them to, combine some jet boat technology out of New Zealand with jacuzzi and so forth and come up with a jet boat. Why? Why did they do that? Well, because it was typically shallow. Just like so, things are not changing. They really aren't changing. Every time something works out that people don't like, they blame it on global warming and use that as an excuse to take away your freedom and your private property. That's what we're seeing constantly on these types of things. And even some of the people who ought to know better, and maybe he does, maybe he was being sarcastic about it. Sometimes it's hard to tell. I wasn't able to tell whether he's being sarcastic or stupid. But exactly what was happening there. One of the other things that happened in the Golden Globes was we had an actress, Michelle Williams, as part of her acceptance speech, was talking about how vital it was for the success of her career and for her freedom and economic success to have her kids aborted. Let's play video clip number 4. This is Michelle Williams at the Golden Globe.
And I wouldn't have been able to do this without employing a woman's right to choose.
What was that? A right to choose what you say on the internet? A right to choose whether or not you want to vaccinate yourself or your children? What right to choose is that she supports?
When to have
that Ricky Gervais said, when you get your speech, stand up, thank your God, thank your agent, and then just leave, please. And she really was thanking her God Thank you, Moloch, almighty god of child sacrifice, because, that was the god that the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, the people throughout that region, they would sacrifice their children to Moloch for prosperity. They believed that passing their child through the fire, placing their child on the arms of a burning altar, burning their children alive, many of which, were the products of the other partner of Moloch, Ashtaroth. They would have their wild sex orgies, and then they would have their unwanted pregnancies. And the way that they could get rid of their unwanted pregnancy was to pass their child through the fire. And so they would thank their god Moloch, just as Michelle Williams did. And they would believe that that brought them prosperity, just as Michelle Williams is telling everybody. I look at this hypocrisy, the idea that it is necessary to kill your kids to get ahead in life. And, of course, that is the narrative that's being pushed by Planned Parenthood. They had a record number of abortions in fiscal year 2019. They only gave 4,279 adoption referrals, but they performed 345,672 abortions. Because typically what they will do is they'll come to you and say, you're not going to be able to afford it. Do you realize how much it'll cost to feed this child for 20 years? How much it'll cost to clothe this child for 20 years? Do you have an extra $1 million sitting around? Well, you can't afford that. You better kill that kid. Because, you pay us now just a little bit of money, Planned Parenthood, and, you'll be dollars ahead. As an economic calculation. But when we talk about this as a freedom calculation, is there anything other than killing a child that the Democrats support your choice in? And, of course, the answer to that is a resounding no. We'll be right back. Stay with us. We're waiting for President Trump to hold a press conference. He said he was going to do it about 20 minutes ago, so we've got an eye on that as to when he shows up. We will go to that live. In the meantime, there's an article on the Daily Caller. Libertarians are finally starting to think about governance, but they're missing one key problem. This is written by Tyler Cohen, professor of economics at George Mason University. He has called himself a libertarian-oriented proprietor of the blog Marginal Revolution. And he thinks that libertarians don't have answers to the important questions facing us. For example, climate change. We don't have any answer to climate change because it's not a problem, Tyler. It's science. It's science that shows that it's not a problem. But nevertheless, we understand that climate change, if somebody puts themselves out there as a libertarian and then they start saying, well, we got to have more government because we've got to have some addressing of climate change. You understand, I've had Mark Morano on many times. He and I have both talked about this. I've pointed it out many times, and Mark's not on the program. But, Alex Newman, New American, anybody that I talk to about climate change, everybody who looks at this understands. And the left has been on record. Mark Morano has recorded these people in interviews saying, if we didn't have climate change, we'd have to invent it because that is the way that we're going to get control of your life. That's the way we're going to grow government. We've talked about it for the longest time. I mean, this is nothing new, quite frankly. Many people have talked about watermelon environmentalists. They have a thin veneer of green on the outside, but on the inside, they're completely red, as in socialism, communism, not the red state America. They use that kind of inversion of the colors. The people who want complete control over your life, the authoritarians, the socialists, the communists, have always identified themselves as red. That's why the mainstream media decided that they would call Republicans red instead of Democrats. But nevertheless, it is watermelon environmentalism. I've even called them environmelons because that's exactly what they are. So nice try, Tyler, but no award. He also said, having tracked the libertarian movement for much of my life, I believe it's now pretty much hollowed out. He said one branch split off from Ron Paulism and less savory alt-right directions, and another, more establishment branch remains out there in force. But it's not really commanding new adherents. For one thing, it doesn't seem that old-style libertarianism can solve or even very well address a number of major problems. And so then, in that context, he mentions climate change. But his big issue is he believes that libertarian societies cannot defend themselves. And he uses as an example Hong Kong. A case in point, Hong Kong, he says. The territory, once a British colony, has been hailed for decades as a libertarian paradise of prosperity. Yet, all along, its freedom and its riches were a function of the willingness of other countries to defend it. Britain, for example, backstopped by Britain. In other words, Hong Kong, with its low taxes, its laissez-faire everything, was nothing more than a free rider. It's easy to let the good times roll when somebody else is guarding the gate. Is that a fair assessment? I would say that is as absurd an assessment of the situation in Hong Kong as his saying, libertarianism cannot handle climate change. Why? Because we won't create a giant government to control everything and tell everybody what they can and cannot have and eat. No, the situation in Hong Kong is not that it can't defend itself. The problem in Hong Kong, as the Hong Kong protesters have pointed out, is that they don't have a Second Amendment. If they had a Second Amendment, they wouldn't have to worry about this. The people in Hong Kong know that. This guy ought to know it if he paid any attention whatsoever. And, of course, they don't have a Second Amendment because Britain decided that they didn't want people to own firearms, just like they have decided they don't want people in their own country to own firearms, just like the Democrats have decided they don't want Americans to own their own firearms. That is the ultimate defense. It's one of the reasons why, and I would ask somebody like Tyler Cowen, as professor at George Mason University, why, Tyler, do you think that Switzerland was able to maintain its freedom and independence as an island country, essentially, surrounded by Nazi Germany and their superior air force? Yes, of course, they did have a mountainous country, and they did have fortified passes that made it difficult for them to go in. But, the Germans had very modern, unparalleled military. They had a Luftwaffe that could have devastated those areas with bombs. They had an armed citizenry, however, and it would have been too expensive a price for the Germans to try to take over Switzerland. And the same thing would be true with mighty China and little Hong Kong if Hong Kong had the Second Amendment. This is why the Democrats and others are so intent on taking away our Second Amendment. And it's why, as we pointed out with Eric Peters, as he is on the line, that the Democrats in Virginia, like Governor Coonman, as Eric calls Northam, have already proposed millions of dollars to enforce laws that they haven't even passed yet to confiscate guns. For example, the governor of Virginia has requested $4 million and 18 law enforcement positions to enforce his gun ban, a request that could be preparatory steps for confiscating the guns that would be banned if they pass State Bill 16. Also, the government is requesting an additional $3.5 million to enforce gun control that has not been passed by the legislature, that is not even current law in Virginia. Things like universal background checks, 1 gun a month limitations, so-called red flag gun confiscation orders, and more. So they've got $7.5 million in requests to fund law enforcement to enforce laws that have not even been passed yet. This is how aggressive they are. And this is how dangerous this type of attitude is. When we look at the push to take guns across the country, as I said many times, President Trump talking about red flag gun laws, and Republicans who say, well, we want to get the hands out of the crazy, the guns out of the hands of crazy people. So we need to have red flag gun laws. We'll take the guns and do the due process later. No, you don't. No, you don't. You obey the Constitution that you swore to. And even if you don't do it, I had a lot of people, when I criticized President Trump for saying that, a lot of people said, well, he's not going to do that. He's just playing 4D chess. He's just engaged in rhetorical games with the Democrats. It's not a game. It's not a game. When you look at that dangerous statement by President Trump, take the guns, do the due process later, people are doing that across the country. When you put that out there as something that is reasonable, that is acceptable, that you will accept, somebody who has put yourself out there as a defender of the Second Amendment, and you accept that, then that is a big issue. Now, here, President Trump, there, as he started this press conference.
As long as I'm president of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Good morning. I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe, and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases. Our great American forces are prepared for anything. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world. No American or Iraqi lives were lost because of the precautions taken, the dispersal of forces, and an early warning system that worked very well. I salute the incredible skill and courage of America's men and women in uniform. For far too long, all the way back to 1979 to be exact, nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over. Iran has been the leading sponsor of terrorism, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons threatens the civilized world. We will never let that happen. Last week, we took decisive action to stop a ruthless terrorist from threatening American lives. At my direction, the United States military eliminated the world's top terrorist, Qasem Soleimani. As the head of the Quds Force, Soleimani was personally responsible for some of the absolutely worst atrocities. He trained terrorist armies, including Hezbollah, launching terrorist strikes against civilian targets. He fueled bloody civil wars all across the region. He viciously wounded and murdered thousands of U.S. troops, including the planting of roadside bombs that maim and dismember their victims. Soleimani directed the recent attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq that badly wounded 4 service members and killed 1 American, and he orchestrated the violent assault on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. In recent days, he was planning new attacks on American targets, but we stopped him. Soleimani's hands were drenched in both American and Iranian blood. He should have been terminated long ago. By removing Soleimani, we have sent a powerful message to terrorists. If you value your own life, you will not threaten the lives of our people. As we continue to evaluate options in response to Iranian aggression, the United States will immediately impose additional punishing economic sanctions on the Iranian regime. These powerful sanctions will remain until Iran changes its behavior. In recent months alone, Iran has seized ships in international waters, fired an unprovoked strike on Saudi Arabia, and shot down 2 U.S. drones. Iran's hostilities substantially increased after the foolish Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2013, and they were given $150 billion, not to mention $1.8 billion in cash. Instead of saying thank you to the United States, they chanted death to America. In fact, they chanted death to America the day the agreement was signed. Then Iran went on a terror spree, funded by the money from the deal, and created hell in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The missiles fired last night at us and our allies were paid for with the funds made available by the last administration. The regime also greatly tightened the reins on their own country, even recently killing 1,500 people at the many protests that are taking place all throughout Iran. The very defective JCPOA expires shortly anyway and gives Iran a clear and quick path to nuclear breakout. Iran must abandon its nuclear ambitions and end its support for terrorism. The time has come for the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Russia, and China to recognize this reality. They must now break away from the remnants of the Iran deal, or JCPOA. And we must all work together toward making a deal with Iran that makes the world a safer and more peaceful place. We must also make a deal that allows Iran to thrive and prosper and take advantage of its enormous untapped potential. Iran can be a great country. Peace and stability cannot prevail in the Middle East as long as Iran continues to foment violence, unrest, hatred, and war. The civilized world must send a clear and unified message to the Iranian regime. Your campaign of terror, murder, mayhem will not be tolerated any longer. It will not be allowed to go forward. Today, I am going to ask NATO to become much more involved in the Middle East process. Over the last 3 years, under my leadership, our economy is stronger than ever before, and America has achieved energy independence. These historic accomplishments change our strategic priorities. These are accomplishments that nobody thought were possible. And options in the Middle East became available. We are now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world. We are independent, and we do not need Middle East oil. The American military has been completely rebuilt under my administration at a cost of $2.5 trillion. U.S. armed forces are stronger than ever before. Our missiles are big, powerful, accurate, lethal, and fast. Under construction are many hypersonic missiles. The fact that we have this great military and equipment, however, does not mean we have to use it. We do not want to use it. American strength, both military and economic, is the best deterrent. 3 months ago, after destroying 100% of ISIS and its territorial caliphate, we killed the savage leader of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, who was responsible for so much death, including the mass beheadings of Christians, Muslims, and all who stood in his way. He was a monster. Al-Baghdadi was trying again to rebuild the ISIS caliphate and failed. Tens of thousands of ISIS fighters have been killed or captured during my administration. ISIS is a natural enemy of Iran. The destruction of ISIS is good for Iran, and we should work together on this and other shared priorities. Finally, to the people and leaders of Iran, we want you to have a future, and a great future, one that you deserve, one of prosperity at home and harmony with the nations of the world. The United States is ready to embrace peace with all who seek it. I want to thank you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
That's a statement that is certainly going to bring grief to Ainsley at Fox and Friends. She didn't want the Iranians to be able to get away with this. They should not have the last missile fired. We should escalate this. President Trump, however, is offering an olive branch rather than escalation. I, for one, am very happy to see that. President Trump said, among other things, we have massive military might. We don't have to use it. We don't want to use it. They even talked about how we have a common enemy, ISIS. And, of course, Soleimani, who was just taken out with a strike, yes, he has killed protesters, presided over the killing of protesters in his own country as well. But he was also one of the leaders in the fight against ISIS, a very effective leader in fighting ISIS in Syria. Of course, we will not talk about what the Saudis are doing in Yemen. We will only talk about the atrocities committed by the Iranians. Again, as I said, there are no good guys over there. But it's a very good thing that President Trump is offering an olive branch rather than escalation. We have a story up on InfoWars showing that apparently it was missile defense technology that took out those rockets that were fired at the military base. However, there's also another widely reported aspect of that, and that is that the Iraqis are saying that they were warned in advance by the Iranians of the missiles coming in, and that they in turn warned Americans. So it may be a combination of defensive technology as well as early warning, human early warning, not just early warning technology that took that down. So either way, the good news is that there was no loss of life. The good news is that there's not going to be, at least at this time, any escalation in conventional warfare. We will have to see what happens in the long term. Again, as we see the warmongers like Pompeo, who pushed President Trump, by all accounts, to assassinate Soleimani, something that was not unjust, but it was not wise, that it most likely will result in some kind of a terrorist attack that will be asymmetric. As Tucker Carlson was saying, was anybody worried about any terrorist attacks from Iran a week or two ago? No. But now that this has happened, we are worried about it. So this policy of Pompeo that was followed by President Trump does not make us more secure. Now people have a legitimate concern about sleeper cells and terrorist events against American targets in the West and elsewhere, and in our own country. Why? Because we have a military that absolutely refuses to protect our border. Any border but ours. Bases anywhere but bases to protect us against terrorists. So our border is wide open for that kind of asymmetric warfare. We don't have to worry about missiles from Iran, even in those particular areas, quite frankly, but we do have to worry about it when it comes to terrorist events in this country. So the good news is that President Trump has now announced that in response to the missile attacks that did not harm anyone by Iran yesterday, and of course it was widely put out there by the Iranians, we have slapped at their face, but we're done unless there's any more escalations. They couldn't be more obvious that they didn't want to have this go any further. And let's hope that there aren't any other provocations. And again, Pat Buchanan had the right summary, I believe, when he said it was just, but it was not wise. Ron Paul saying the only way that they can really strike at us in that area is if we have our troops there. So let's get our troops out of the area. Let's take this as an opportunity to stop this dumb and dumber foreign policy that's coming from Mike Pompeo, Vice President Pence, and others. Vice President Pence, as I said yesterday, I talked about it yesterday, talking about how the Iranians were behind 9/11 and so forth. And I took that segment out of yesterday's program as a separate video. I posted it on Twitter. I had somebody come back and say, well, they actually were behind 9/11. Are you kidding me? And as evidence, he offered statements that he copied and pasted from the Pentagon. Well, of course, we can believe that, right? We can believe anything they say about 9/11. And I replied and I said, what we should really be afraid of is if the Iranians have the kind of technology where they can make 3 steel skyscrapers collapse in their own footprint in a matter of hours using only 2 planes. They can take down 3 steel skyscrapers. We should be afraid of a country that has that kind of technology. But I said, what is even more frightening is if we have Americans who are so incredibly gullible that they can believe a story like that from the military-industrial complex over their own lying eyes and allow our own government to set up endless wars for the last 2 decades and destroy every aspect of our freedom while they create a police surveillance state. That's what is the most scary about all of this. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Yesterday I talked about the fact that CNN has now dedicated a reporter to come after the Babylon Bee, like they dedicated Oliver Darcy to come after InfoWars. And the Babylon Bee, and of course it's not just CNN, it's also the CIA. You have a CIA analyst who's pushing her book about how you need to rely on them to tell you what is true and what isn't true. And she is, wringing her hands, saying the same thing CNN is. People are sharing these Babylon Bee stories, these satire things, and they think it's true. They don't know any better. They're idiots. We need to shut down the Babylon Bee. And so the Babylon Bee responded with, wait for it, a satire. They said, the internet is only big enough for one fake news site, says CNN. CNN has slammed the world's best satire site, the Babylon Bee, after CNN executives realized that fake news articles on the website are getting at least as much social media traction as their own CNN articles. There ain't room in this internet for the both of us, growled one CNN anchor on air Monday evening. There simply aren't enough people out there for us to fool with our fake news stories and for the Babylon Bee to fool with their satire. There isn't enough clickbait and outrage traffic to go around. Reporters of the media outlet also pointed out their news was much faker than Babylon Bee's. They're obviously amateurs over there at the Bee, said Brian Stelter. A lot of times their reporting comes true. If you're going to do fake news, you got to do it right. 100% fake, guaranteed, 24/7. They really should learn from the pros over here at CNN. Stay out of our territory, growled Brian Stelter. Oh, that's why the Babylon Bee is so feared by these people. As I said yesterday, one of Saul Alinsky's rules is satire is the most devastating weapon because there is no defense against it. And these people at CNN are quite defenseless when it comes to a battle of wits, as you can see. But no, actually, it is true that many times their satire does come true. I've pointed that out many times as well. But of course, nothing that CNN ever says does come true. That is the reality. And as Breitbart pointed out, the guy who has been put on the beat to take down the Christian satire site, Babylon Bee, O'Sullivan, has used his verified Twitter account not only to attack them, but also to repeatedly post stories from The Onion. And they showed some people on Twitter went back and collected a bunch of the tweets from this CNN reporter who had been tweeting out stories from The Onion. Things like this, for example. Critics are worried that new CIA report puts the U.S. at considerable risk of transparency. Now, see, you and I understand that's a satire. We know that, that the CIA and the U.S. government would never be transparent. So we understand that as a joke. But evidently, maybe he does. It's a kind of a, I don't know if that's a left-wing perspective on that. Certainly a lot of Republicans and conservatives understand how duplicitous and lying the CIA has been until they started telling us lies about Iran. And then we had to believe everything they had to say, right? But nevertheless, he doesn't have a problem putting out The Onion because typically The Onion is rolling the other way. And as I said yesterday when I talked about this, I have in the past, I thought that Babylon Bee is occasionally brilliant. The story when Elizabeth Warren came out with her DNA test showing that she was, yes, wait for it. This is not satire. The reality is that Elizabeth Warren is twice as white as the average American of European descent. In other words, she has half the Native American blood in her that the typical American of European white descent has. Their way of parroting that, however, as ridiculous as that was, they came up one better. They said, Hillary Clinton, not to be outdone, said, yes, and I've had a DNA report, and my DNA report shows that I'm only half reptilian alien DNA, unlike, what people in InfoWars and other people have said that I'm 100% alien, reptilian alien. I thought that was very funny. I tweeted that out, and the Daily Beast tried to get me thrown off of Twitter. And now the Daily Beast is putting up an article fantasizing about Iran perhaps attacking President Trump's Trump Tower. And these people are not only vicious liars, but they're quite dangerous, actually. This is an article at Infowars.com. Daily Beast posts an article that all but fantasized about Iran launching a terror attack on the president's quote-unquote beloved Trump Tower. These are the same people who tried to get me thrown off. Now, they're going to say, well, this is just a satire, right? Talking about a Babylon Bee satire article about Hillary Clinton's reptilian DNA. They want to use that to get me thrown off of social media. But they can talk about how the Iranians should attack President Trump and his towers, and no consequences for that at all for the Babylon Bee, or for Daily Beast. They went on to say, imagine how the Donald would react to the destruction of his beloved Trump Tower, writes the reporter at the Daily Beast. Daily then speculates how a successful attack could unfold. He says, around noon on Monday, a truck of the same type that Timothy McVeigh used to bomb the federal building in Oklahoma City with such devastating effect in 1995, stopped for a red light on West 57th Street, a half block up Fifth Avenue from the tower. An Iranian sleeper agent with a load of explosives would have needed only to make a right to do his worst before anybody could have moved to stop him. There you go. That's satire. Evidently, humor from the Daily Beast. I don't see any humor in that at all. And yet, we see the same thing coming from Ilhan Omar. Not in as much fantastic detail. You know, she doesn't fantasize over how it could be done. She doesn't lay out a blueprint over how it could be done. But she essentially says the same thing. Iran could threaten Trump hotels worldwide, and he could provoke war over the loss of revenue from skittish guests and so forth. Oh, yeah. So, let's threaten President Trump. This is also an article up on InfoWars if you want to see that. So it's okay for Ilhan Omar to say, let's threaten President Trump. Yeah, that's the way that we can get him to divest from his businesses and comply with the Emoluments Clause. There is no violation of the Emoluments Clause. Talked about that many times, talked about it with Richard Proctor. That is not at all what is talked about with the Emoluments Clause. But she is laying it out there that maybe, they should attack President Trump's personal properties, attack him personally. And the Daily Beast is doing that as they have continued to attack us. Folks, if you want to stand with us here at InfoWars, as we are at the front of the attacks on free speech and free press, we have continued our sale for another couple of days. We have up to 75% off at InfoWarsStore.com and free shipping. 60% off many, many items. Things like Knockout, our all-natural sleep aid. Things like Brain Force Plus, my favorite supplement. Other supplements that are going to help your health that you're not going to feel right away. Things like BioTruth Selenium. Selenium is an essential mineral, and you can look it up on the internet. You can see how many different ways selenium protects your health. You're not going to feel it when you take it, but just like when I don't take my supplements and I take a vacation and I get sick, I feel the consequences of not taking the supplement. And so always act proactively on this. These types of things will help your body to be healthy, will help and strengthen your immune system. And of course, the question is not even which things we need to take, but which things are well produced. And our selenium is BioTrue because it is non-GMO. It's made in America. It is the best form of selenium you're going to find anywhere. We also have 25 to 50% off all apparel at InfoWarsStore.com. And again, some items up to 75% off, free shipping store-wide. And of course, one of the products that we have, which is something that has helped me a great deal, it was suggested to me from people on Twitter. They said, you need to nebulize and inhale Silver Bullet. And I started doing that. That made a big difference. I'm still recovering, but that really turned the corner for me when I started inhaling Silver Bullet. I've used it many times for quite some time, and that is now $9.95. Again, up to 75% off our products at InfoWarsStore.com, free shipping store-wide, and that will end in the next day or so. So we really do need and appreciate your support. And we're very happy to hear President Trump accept the fact that the Iranians signaled and said, that's it. We don't want to go any further if you won't go any further. And I'm glad that he's listening to his better angels and not to his fox and friends. So we'll be right. That's it for today's broadcast. Thank you.